Okay, I'm going to go to Beryl now with BSH. So, Beryl,
Yes,
can you give a little background about yourself and,
of course.
how you ended up, working on Outside In and a little background about BSH? Yeah. And
Yes,
so
of course.
let's give Beryl our attention today. We have three case studies. We have the BSH case study, which focuses on outside in demand management. We've got the Nestle case study focusing on new product launch and the LKQ on using the bullwhip effect. So today's your lucky day. Not only do you get the case studies, but you get less of me today. So I'm going to give it to Beryl.
Okay, thank you, Laura. So I'm Beril Boa. I'm working at BSH in supply chain department as a data scientist, and working here since almost 8 years now. And I'm located in Munich. And hello from rainy Munich today.
Hmm.
So at BSH, you might know us from our main brands like Bosch Siemens. It stands for Bosch Siemens Hausgeräte, which is home appliances. And as well as we have ecosystem brands, Home Connect, and also service brands. And at BSH, we have more than 10,000 of SKUs, products, and 10,000 of customers, and 150 warehouses and 40 factories. So you could assume the complexity. And if you would think about demand planning and demand forecasting processes with this complexity on granular level, I think you would also agree me it's too high. So in the next slide, so we started Impulse program, which we started to implement our sales and operation processes with IBP for demand. And with IBP for demand, we have now a robust processes, but still there was a lack of market knowledge and having some insights from the market and improving our demand forecast. So that's why we started our project, which is called Causal Forecast. But before that, we were in contact with Laura, and we were involved in the project Zebra 2 years or 3 years ago already. And there we really saw the opportunity of the outside in methods. So here I want to show you the difference between traditional forecast and outside and advanced forecast. So this analogy is actually belongs to my former colleague Rebecca Wall. She was also in the project Zebra, and the traditional time series forecast is actually like using an old car and only you're able to see the road behind. You're not seeing in front of you the bumps and the signals, etc., because you're only using the historical data. And with the outside and advanced forecast, you're now able to see the bumps and the signals, traffic lights, and you're also using a technological car, so which is actually showing it's great. So in the next slide, please. So here I wanted to show you the forecastability on the product warehouse level, SKU level. So 50% of our products is identified as having a smooth demand pattern, and the rest has intermittent, either erratic or lumpy demand patterns, which means only 50% of the variants are forecastable. So how we calculated it? By using the calculating the variety in time and also in quantity over our demand. So, and also by using advanced demand forecasting methods like the machine learning and also the outside in data, we are now able to forecast better than the traditional approach.
And Beryl, did you know this before you started the work on Outside In? Did you know that all
No,
these items were not forecastable?
no, we
Because
haven't
I,
checked it. Yeah.
Yeah, because I think that's what's happened over the last decade. I think as people have elongated the product tail and made the product platform more complex, they are assuming that the items are forecastable at the item level, whereas when we test it, they may not be, or they may require different modeling. Yeah.
Yes, definitely. And also before the outside in trainings, we were always focusing on the product location level forecast for the short term for the executions. But after the trainings, we also started changed our focus to more aggregated forecast because you see the impact of the market indicators on very aggregated level, which is also driving you to do some adjustments on the granular level.
And I'm very proud of you because, you had such an issue at the beginning of the pandemic when we had the demand shift and, you've made so much progress. So keep going. I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Thank you. Thank you. So right now our solution uses hundreds of indicators from various of data sources, and we are providing monthly forecasts to our planners. And also we have up to 29% forecast value at on granular level. And the solution is now fully automated in the cloud environment, AWS. And we are now discussing sharing our forecast with different departments than supply chain, like marketing and sales. And yeah, I think we are on a good way right now. And yeah, the next slide, please. Just here you can see our data sources that we get the external data or internal data. So our base data source is, of course, IBP for demand, which we have our sales orders data and some demand planning measures. And we are using also Stata, Google, Celonis, Oxford, GfK, DBnomics, Amazon, and Redshift. So from these data sources, we are getting Google search volumes or cycle time, service level. And for example, from Oxford, we were getting data related with the COVID, like some stringency indexes or the other measures related with COVID, but it's not important anymore. So there are no data actually. And from GfK, we are getting this point of sales data and also competitors data. And from DBnomics, we get the macroeconomics data. And
Now, the
next
number one question I get, Beryl, is how hard is it to build a market-driven forecast using multiple inputs? How hard was that?
So it is hard, to be honest. It is hard because you are dealing with a lot of indicators on different aggregation levels, and you are using different APIs, ETLs to build this kind of models. The modeling actually the easiest part, I can say, because there are built-in models. You just need to do some parameter tuning, or you just need to select the machine learning model. But the data preparation and extraction part is actually the hardest part, because for some data you have it on country level, for some you have it on even on product level. So you need to deal with the aggregation levels and aggregation rules very carefully, and this is the crucial part. So we're still trying to fix these issues because a lot of indicators, and we are adding more and more. So keeping the trace of all the indicators is not so easy.
Yeah.
And I wanted to show you how we use with one indicator as an example, how we use the market latency. So this is an example of BSH sales figures for Spain, and the orange dotted line is actually the consumer prices in Spain. So from the first look, these are two distinct time series, and there are no relation. But after doing some correlation analysis, and in the next slide, you will see the relation between two different time series. Now you see the fitting trend line and also fitting ups and downs here, which is actually very useful indicator for sales in Spain. And here the latency, which is the highest correlation on the second leg, means that whenever there will be any increase on the consumer prices in Spain, then it will affect our demand 2 months later in a negative way, because we mirrored this.
And
So
how did you synchronize this? How did you get from this to this?
So we are checking from 0 to 24 months lag, shifting indicator, all the indicators, not only one, and this is automated. We are calculating the correlations, and if the correlation is negative and still high, then we are mirroring because it's a negative correlation. So after mirroring, it looks positive. So, and we are finding the highest correlation on which leg do we have. So
So one of the other questions I get from the class is how do you measure latency? And, I had said, measure flow and look at how flow triggers orders. And people are like, yeah, that's pretty hard. But how did you measure latency and how did you unravel this data?
So as I said, we are checking from 0 to 24 months lag and finding the highest correlated lag, which indicates the latency actually. So in this
Mhm.
case, it was 2-second lag has the highest correlation. So we are making an assumption that there is a 2 months of latency of this indicator on our demand. So
By pattern fitting, right?
definitely.
Okay. All right.
Here, so as I said, we have a lot of indicators, but for the main indicators, I wanted to show you how it's changing over the countries because, for example, here for Germany, the price has the highest impact and then the other countries. And for example, for Turkey, economical indicators has highest impact. And yeah, for Germany, Great Britain and Turkey's point of sales data, and for Germany and Turkey still social media data. And for Germany, again, the time related attributes like some indicators explaining the seasonality, which is the Pünktlichkeit, we say in German. So it's again has the highest impact. So yeah,
And these regions are driven by your geography sales regions, or how did you define the regions you were going to model?
so right now our model is running for all countries in Europe. So in our forecasting level, of course, on location product level, which location means the warehouse, regional warehouse. But here I wanted to make it easier for you. I wrote the countries,
Okay.
the warehouses that distributes to these countries. So
Okay. Thank you, Beryl.
thanks. Here there is a comparison about our model's accuracy, again, for this country. The causal forecast, our outside-in approach, has, for many of the countries, has a good forecast value add. On top of the naive forecast, which is a traditional time series forecast, you see the difference between the orange and black bars. And our solution is quite close, most of the cases quite close to the manual human plan. So which means by running this 4 or 5 hours of code, we are having good results like the human demand plan.
And how
And
do your demand planners feel about that?
yeah, we are not communicating in that way. We are providing them the results right now. We are not overtaking the forecast directly. We are providing results forecast to the planners, and they are deciding right now that it's kind of an informational key figure to the demand planners. But of course, in future, we will discuss this to change or replace human plan with the forecast, but we are not on that point right now.
And before you did this, what was your forecast value add? Didn't you have a negative forecast value add with just the SKU level IBP forecasting? Wasn't that a
Yes.
negative forecast value add? What was the
Mhm.
negative? How negative was it?
So the human plan was negative, you mean, right?
Right.
Yes. So it was, yeah, I don't know it by heart, but it was way below because after when we started to provide this forecast, both naive and advanced forecast, we see the improvements of the human demand plan because they are taking over as much as they can. And for example, for some countries, we see, for example, you can see it here with Spain. Yes, it they are very welcome to take over the results because they see the opportunity. They are trying to make it as much as automated. And that's why you are seeing here the close relation or lower
Right.
forecast value because they are using our forecast in.
My memory says it was like -7. And this was early on.
Probably,
Yeah,
yeah,
and 29% is awesome. Awesome, and
definitely.
And this harkens me back to when we first got computers on people's desks, and we used to have a secretarial pool. And there was a big pushback around business leaders typing their own memos or even email back in the 1980s because it would eliminate the secretarial pool. But we had to eliminate the secretarial pool to use the power of the computer. And I liken the demand and supply planners to that analogy that, if we can get better forecast without manual touches and we could change the role to be more of an orchestrator, I think we could eliminate 80 to 85% of the planners.
Definitely. Totally agree.
Yeah. Okay. Shall we go on?
Of course. Yeah, please. And with the suggestion of Laura during the last meetings, we tried to calculate the bullwhip amplification. It was a challenge because of the different aggregation levels, and there were a lot of calculation methods online. So I tried to do it in a best way. So here, between our sell-in and sell-out quantities, we found out that the bullwhip amplification factor is 2.08, which is considerably high. And then if we go through the upstream, I calculated the sell-in and production quantity amplification, which was 1.35, which is actually I think, it's not something expected, because usually when the bullwhip starts, it's getting amplified through the upstream. But here we are as BSH, we are somehow smoothing this amplification and reducing it. There's still an amplification, but somehow we are, but of course, after calculating it and sharing with the managers in our department, they directly decided to use this measure as a KPI and monitor it regularly to be aware of the situation regarding to bullwhip. And thank you for the suggestions, Laura.
Yeah, and do you use it at all for like procurement or production planning yet?
No, not yet. We
Okay.
are just discussing it.
Because I think the opportunity in the market is, when we build our procurement workbenches to use the bullwhip effect, in the direct material procurement, because I think that whole area needs a rebuild. But anyway, thank you for sharing.
Yeah, because for procurement, then you need to do some BOM, bill of materials.
Yes, right.
Go to it's a bit harder than for the finished goods, but yeah, you're right.
But imagine if you had something like Kinaxis or O9 or Logility that would do that for you. And because they've got the bombs and the translation of demand, it's a great opportunity, I think, for the advanced planning market. But anyway, go ahead.
Okay, thanks. The solution is rolled out to region Europe and Turkey right now. You see the orange parts, including Australia, Peru, Chile, Israel, and this year we are planning to roll out to US, region North America, REM, region emerging markets, and then next year we will plan it for region Greater China and also for our consumer products. And right now, as this situation is like 63 of the turnover is already implemented. And yeah, we started with some macroeconomical data analysis, and then we continued with Project Zebra pilot and then outside in trainings. And our goal is to replacing the naive forecast immediately, and then of course replacing the manual adjustments, manual plan in the long term.
Tell the group the story because, when I first started working with Michael and the team, you were in the beginning of the pandemic and, we measured the latency, the 4 months market latency, the 2 months demand latency, and the 5 to 6 weeks process latency from IBP. And, the market had moved with COVID, but you hadn't changed your production because you were still working on orders. But when the market started to return and the COVID levels went down, I love the story Michael told me about how you used this data with the board to actually change so that people didn't follow the order pattern.
Yeah, definitely. During the COVID, we had higher sales and then it turned back and yeah, it's affected a lot. So I don't recall which story of Michael, but
Okay, all right.
yeah,
Yeah, but he was talking about how you got board recognition for being able to model this and that, in the COVID return that, you were able to avoid the overstocking of materials. Okay.
so this was it actually. This is our IT architecture. I don't know if it's interesting for you. Just standard data update, preparation, modeling, and evaluation steps of a machine learning project. So I think this was my last slide.
Okay. Well, let us
Yeah,
let people ask you some questions if you're okay with it.
of course.
I'll start while people raise their hand. Let's talk about the change management because, you're in Germany, you've got a long legacy with SAP, and transactional data. I've worked with BSH off and on for a decade. How about the change management? Because you were in the data science group and, when you first started Project Zebra, these terms were all new. Tell me about the
Definitely.
change management that went on within BSH.
Change management, it's still an issue. I couldn't say that it's solved. We are having a good communication with the planners. They are still having some trust issues because they are questioning our forecast results, and we are trying to make everything as transparent as we can do because we are now whenever they have some questions like, okay, on the 12th month, why is the forecast is too high or too low? We are telling them, we are giving them some materials to explain why the forecast is high or low, like demystified forecast. So this is actually helping, and but there is still a resistance to use this advanced or machine learning AI solutions because whenever we ask why you not using it, because in the systems we have the usage measures and we are able to track how much the planners took over our forecast and how much not. And after tracking it, we are in communication with the planners, but they are like giving us some reasons like we don't trust this.
Right.
And the conversation stops at some point because you cannot do anything because it's their personal opinion. And yeah, some management push was necessary, and it's done already, and I think we are seeing the good results of it, unfortunately.
Well, that's why I think it's analogous to the secretarial pool, right? I remember
Definitely.
when, the secretaries wanted just to get a typewriter with software versus, really changing it. And people that are trained in traditional APS to ERP to traditional S&OP would say, yeah, this doesn't make sense. Okay, I got three hands up. Great. Steve, you're up first.
Uh,
Question for
um,
Beryl.
yeah, Beryl, thanks for the presentation. Very interesting. I had a question about the causal factors, and I think you touched on, but I just want to confirm kind of what I heard. So I've worked with customers before that come to us, and they've got lots of different causal factors. They'll bring, here's 15 different factors that we think influence our forecast. And when we do the analysis of it, it normally comes out that there's two or three that are really the main drivers. And you listed, I didn't count them, but it seemed like about 20
A
different
lot.
causal factors. So are you
Okay,
actually using
Steve,
different
Steve,
factors? Yeah.
Steve, let me just interrupt here. I think that Beryl uses the term causal as a project name, not necessarily the classical causal modeling that we think about. Is that fair, Beryl?
Yes, it is correct because
Yeah.
we named it a long time ago and it's stick with it. So, but yes, we have a lot of indicators and we have a variable feature selection procedures within our code. And this code defines which indicators to use for which countries. So it's already
But
included in the procedure and there are subset of the features for each countries and we are checking it of course, regularly, but because it might be also changed.
But her
So-
modeling is more than causal, Steve.
Okay.
Okay. All right, moving to Suzette.
Thank you. Thank you, Beryl. Really, really interesting to see what you have done. My question is, what is the connection or the relationship between the causal forecast and the FBA? How do you connect these two pieces?
Causal forecast with what? Sorry, I couldn't.
The FBA, the forecast value added.
How do
forecast
you
value add.
connect your work on the data modeling to forecast value add? You actually are modeling the demand streams, aren't you?
Yes, we are. Mhm.
Yeah, and so for FVA for turn volume, are you using an average of certain number of months, or what are you using for your naive?
So the measurement is actually quite similar. It's a BSH calculation, but it's the MAPE measurement, mean absolute percentage error.
Mhm.
It's quite similar with it. And we are comparing MAPE results of the naive forecast and causal forecast and also the manual plan. And then we are seeing the differences between each. And we are, I think, as I showed you, with the naive forecast, we are already having a really good results, and we are quite close to the human plan.
But for the naive barrel, you're using 3 months average, or what are you using for the naive?
It's 12 months average in the system. Yeah, it might change for the countries, but yeah, in IBP we have 12 months of simple moving average model, which is, we call it naive. But yeah.
Okay, all right, okay.
Okay, so
Moving-
let me just recap to see if I understand. The FBA, you use it to measure the effectiveness of this kind
Yes.
of new approach.
Yes,
And then, but the formula to get into this causal forecast is the combination of all these kind of different inputs that you are now
Yeah.
gathering,
Mhm.
right? Okay.
Mhm. Yes.
Perfect.
different
Thank you.
inputs and different models, and
Different
she's
models,
doing
yes.
more than causal in the classical sense.
Okay.
I need to
Marcia,
fix the
you're,
naming.
yeah, you got to fix the naming. It throws the classical demand planners into, off the bowling pins.
Definitely.
Marcia, your
Yes.
question.
Thank you very much for the presentation and congratulations on all the great improvements. My question, I saw that there are a high percentage, I believe it was 50%, that are non-forecastable. So what is the company doing about them? Is it demand planning or is it more sales on those items? I would like to understand what to do, or what's the work for the 50% that are non-forecastable.
Yes.
So what
for
tactics did you use, Beryl, for the non-forecastable?
So for the non-forecastable, so as I said, for the granular level, it's tricky because you need it for the short term and granular level for the execution. But for the long term, we and my team, we try to change the focus, especially for mid and long term, to the aggregated levels, which we have way higher forecast value adds. And also, we try to find different indicators for this purpose, like how do we explain this intermittency within the demand, because there are some empty gap months which a product doesn't have any sales. So what could be the reason? So we checked the internal data and also externals. We found some, and for some cases we couldn't find anything. We created our own features like a sales flag. So if we created a special indicator like a sales flag, it explains like a binary. There is a sales at this particular amount for this product or not. It's like 1 and 0. And we try to forecast this at the beginning for the future, like a binary logistic regression. And then after forecasting this, we use it within the causal forecast. So this was one approach, and it was
Yep.
quite useful.
Okay, Suzette, your hand's still up. Are we moving on, or you still have another question? Okay. You still have a question?
I don't, sorry. Yeah,
Okay, all
I'm
right.
turning down.
Okay, all right, okay. Anybody else got a question before we move on with Beryl? I think it's a great case study on, first of all, looking at forecastability, analyzing demand latency, the bullwhip effect. Now, just to put into perspective, this is 2 years in that Beryl's been working, and she works in a data science group for the person who's in charge of the Center of Excellence. But they have a lot of political issues around sales forecasting, what's happening with, finance. And one of the things I'm very proud of is the decrease in process latency in IBP or SNOP, whatever you want to call it, based upon the demand data that she's been able to provide. Okay, we're going to continue now. And Margot, are you on yet?
I am. I'm here.
Awesome. Okay, I've got your slides loaded. Can you tell the group? Also, Beryl gave you some extra slides. She's always outperforming. So these are in your deck, so you can look at the model. So Margot, tell the group a little bit about you and
Sure.
how you came to be in this kind of testing and process.
Sure. So I'm Margot Cohen. I'm a Senior Director of Advanced Analytics for what we call Ensure Supply, which most other companies just call supply chain. It's manufacturing, procurement, and like logistics, or what we call supply chain. I've been at Nestle almost 6 years. I came to this through a leader in my organization who at the time was my boss, who Laura had worked with previously when she was at Nestle some time back. And she had reached out to my boss and asked him to attend the Zebra event back about a year and a half ago now. And he wasn't able to join, so asked me to participate. And as I was flying out from the East Coast to the West Coast, I was thinking, I don't have time for this. I don't know what this is, and I don't know why I committed to do this. And when I left and was flying back from the West Coast to the East Coast, I was thinking, I'm so glad I did this. It sparked so many thoughts and ideas in my head, and I thought I just need to keep talking to Laura, keep participating with this group, seeing what I can take from Laura's research and the group's findings and energy and ideas and bring it back to Nestle. So when I got back, I asked Laura if I could be part of her Spark board. And through that, I volunteered to do a case study with OMP as we were just implementing the OM Partners software, and they were a new partner with Laura on testing different use cases. So Laura, if you want to go to the next slide, I'm assuming that you've already shared the different kind of outside in use cases and areas, but if not, this is probably a slide that will come up later in the training. Our use case focused on demand visibility. So OMP selected several use cases that they wanted to test. And I volunteered to specifically focus on demand visibility because I believe that that's an issue at Nestle. And I thought, again, if I could work with OMP to create a solution or a tool or new areas of opportunity for them to incorporate outside in thinking into their tool, since we were implementing their tool, it would come back and help us at Nestle in the long run. So that's how I got started with this effort.
Okay, now I'm going to pick on you because you asked me a question at the very beginning of
Yes,
Blaze, if you remember.
I remember it.
Okay, what question did you ask me?
But how do we actually do this?
Exactly.
It sounds good in theory, but I don't know how to do this.
Right. And what did I tell you?
Just sit through the training and then you'll understand.
And what did you come to find out? What did you get to understand out of this?
It's hard to do it. It's very hard to do it. So I had some ideas of where to start. So at the time, we were going through kind of a strategy session around demand planning. So I kind of put that together with this concept and said, I can bring these ideas and concepts back to that session and the leaders who were thinking about demand planning and the future of demand planning at Nestle US and our roadmap. And so I presented some of the concepts to them, and I've just sort of been slowly infusing some of these concepts into my work and the work that I do in partnership with demand planning. So there's 2 Nestle people in this training. One is the process excellence, or was the process excellence lead for demand planning. So she was the person I worked with as from an analytics perspective to add more analytics to planning and how we better collaborate between our teams. And then the other person is heavily focused in our rollout in, or was at the time anyway, heavily focused in our rollout in OMP because of the business that she's was supporting from demand planning was our first kind of pilot. So they've probably heard, I know they've heard me talk about this a lot. So I've been sort of infusing this into our roadmap for planning over the last, I guess, year and a half or so.
And what did you learn from that experience?
From the training, or trying to implement this, or trying to infuse this?
Trying to infuse it into the
It's
organization.
hard. It's really hard. There are areas where people are open to it, and there are areas where people are not. There are things that we've slowly incorporated over time. Others are a bigger change in terms of ways of working that are much broader than I can directly influence. So as I go through the details of what we've done, you can see all the people that are involved in that. And what I realized is that, you know, I need sort of a coalition to help me make some of these changes. And the two people from Nestle that are in this training are part of that group that I've adopted. I don't know if they like that or not, but I have kind of brought people into the way that I'm thinking and trying to push these to help. Oh, good, Sandy, I'm glad you love it. But it's hard, and it will take a lot of time. I think that's what I've learned.
And for clarity, you work in an analytics group that supports the business, right?
Right. So I don't sit in supply chain or any particular function. So in some areas it's helpful, in some areas it's not. One area it's helpful is to kind of have a little bit more of an outside perspective and think about how this outside in thinking can increase our use of analytics. But from a process and org change perspective, that's why I have like Sandy and Shannon kind of helping me, because they're in supply chain. They can help actually make some of these changes.
Awesome. Okay. You ready to move on now?
Yep.
Okay. Let's move the slides. Sorry.
Okay, so our goal here was to focus on a very small use case because we didn't have a lot of time. And we took new product introduction using Walmart customer data. So again, we've made it relatively small, but it's an area where we have good data and we think we could show the benefits of outside in thinking and in a very kind of scope. OMP had a conference last August or September that they wanted to present this, and we started in about March. So we knew we had to be pretty focused, and it was, you know, part-time for me and for the OMP team as well. We were using orders and shipments as a proxy for demand. We knew that I knew that there's a fair amount of both data and process latency, and in new products, we need to make a decision on when to schedule production, often before we've seen any true demand showing up in our data. So this was an attempt to figure out how can we reduce the latency so we can make a better decision about when to schedule the, you know, second production run.
Sorry, Margot.
That's okay.
While I bring the slides up, tell the group a little bit about your journey with OMP, because, you know, I made you do role-based views and go back and look at the data that you had. Tell the group a little bit about that process.
Yeah, so we selected OMP as our replacement for SAP APO about 4 or 5 years ago. You can go through, Laura, like 3 or 4 more clicks to just populate this whole slide. There's 3 yellow boxes. Yep, that's good.
Yeah, that threw me off. Sorry. I was like, oh, how do I get this to populate? And then I screwed. I'm sorry.
So OMP right now, only people in supply chain and manufacturing have access, but there's a lot of data that gets read into OMP and out from OMP. And so thinking about how do we broaden the view of some of the data and the reporting, like we've had a lot of challenges with the data flowing from there into our data lake and vice versa, but also just giving that data, making it available for reporting and analytics and visibility, like broader across the organization. We're not quite there yet. So Shannon leads the rollout project, and so she can talk to this in more detail, but we have finished, I believe we've almost fully finished with the first network. So we talk about a network as a temperature class, like frozen, chilled, or ambient. And we still have another couple rollouts that will get the other networks. But it's been, I guess, 2 years, I think now, since we've really started implementing. So it takes a long time, we'll say that. So what I was trying to do was increase our accuracy of forecasting for, like I said, new products and reduce the bullwhip and latency, as well as show some visibility, like visualizations that work cross-functionally. So this role-based dashboards, but also create a way for scenario planning to look at some different planning, the impact of some different plans across these role-based metrics and dashboards. We were able to get an increased forecast accuracy just by switching data sets that we use for point of sale data. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. And then that also decreased the latency because we were using an external data provider, IRI, where we don't get updates until we get updates every 2 weeks and it's aggregated. And by going into the customer specific point of sale data, we were able to decrease that latency as well as see that point of sale data directly. And with that comes the ability to reduce inventory rate. Like a very large part of our waste and excess inventory is new products that we've produced where we didn't need that extra volume because we weren't seeing the actual sales and we were making not optimal decisions. And the dashboards really enable different roles in the organization to see the same data, but based on the way they want to see it. So what I had to discover, and if you go to the next slide, Laura, is that understanding the roles that people play and the KPIs that they use and how they want to see the data was a lot more complicated than I expected. And also, I don't have full visibility to that. Like I mentioned, I sit in a centralized analytics role. So they're not my metrics and they're not necessarily my roles. And so what I ended up doing was creating this storyboard of or question grid by role and a storyboard of what all the metrics are, what are all the roles that are involved in this decision, what are the metrics that they use, what decisions are they trying to make, so that I could really do this kind of deep dive into what those visualizations and simulations would need to be. So this is some of the activity that I did to tackle this use case. And so just kind of for reference, some of the work that I had to do. And then if you go to the next slide, Laura, this is a detail of this question grid. So as we were working together with Laura, myself, and OMP, and I would say, I went through the training, OMP, not really, but it was hard to put this into practice. So we took a lot of coaching and guidance from Laura along the way. And we used this exercise of this question grid of like, what are the different questions that each role has to try to answer, specifically around new products and like when they want to schedule production, so when they would make additional inventory, and how do they make that decision? And so based on this, we were able to then create the more detailed visualizations, and I'll walk through those, but I just wanted to point this out because this was a lesson learned for me. I think it was as well for Laura, of like a way to put this together. And I had to go to other people to do this. Like I didn't have all this information myself.
Well, one of the issues that I've had in every one of the pilots is most people want to go to data first without doing the role-based storyboard. And I'm like, no, we need to start with a role-based storyboard to look at what data they need, because everybody walks around with their own paradigm, and the data that they pull is often wrong because they don't truly understand the role. And so this gets back to design thinking, which is looking at what do people need by role, because the term demand is used frequently in the organization in very different ways, and people don't stop and say, what is needed to help this role or this person and this job to make better decisions around demand, because what the sales account guy needs versus the marketing person versus finance versus supply chain, the role-based needs are so different.
And so one more click on this slide, please, Laura. So I just wanted to show an example of the difference between weekly point of sale data and orders. So this is just one item, but you can see that the order data has so much more variability, and like that the highs are much higher, the lows are much lower, and there's just so much more noise in this signal versus the point of sale data. You could see, I mean, it does have a downward trend on this particular item, but the range of point of sale data is much smaller. So when Laura talks about bullwhip effect, like this is a great example of the bullwhip effect we see when we're looking at order data. And so if we're trying to do a forecast, really understanding how is the product selling versus what are we seeing in the orders makes a really big difference in kind of the understanding that true demand signal. So I wanted to share this as well. So, and there's a number of clicks on this slide, Laura, but when I talked a little bit about, yeah, that's good. I talked about reducing the latency. So we did an exercise of mapping out the latency in this particular process. And like I mentioned, this point of sale data versus the IRI data feed. So not only is it more frequent that we get the POS data directly from some of our key customers, but it's also at a lower level of granularity. And one thing that was interesting here is that we had this data. We had this data in our data lake, yet in the process that's used by this cross-functional new product launch team, they wait and see the IRI data because that's sort of what they're trained to do. We use the point of sale data from an analytics perspective and a lot of things that we do, but the marketing and sales team was kind of trained to use the IRI data because we've had that relationship and that's the process that's been around. We didn't used to have the POS data. And so now that we have that data and we have it in our lake and it's harmonized so that it matches our Nestle item IDs, like it used to be that we had this, like we would get our point of sale data from our customers and it would be at their item level, not our item, and we couldn't match them. But now we have this harmonized in the data lake because we use it for so many different things. And so having the cross-functional team being able to see that data instead would make a huge difference. Obviously, it helps our forecast as well. But this is one of the things that was like a kind of easy, like, duh, like, let's make sure that everybody knows this data is available. So when getting back to what I started saying, that change is hard, like this is an area where it's not super hard to like just kind of spread the word, like, hey, do people know in sales and marketing that they can be using this data directly? That's kind of a small tweak that can be made. So, looking for incremental opportunities for improvement. Okay, so I'm going to take over the screen for a second if I can, Laura.
Sure, absolutely.
And hopefully you can hear the video that I'm going to play.
So these are the roles that she's going to play the video around. So I made them map these roles. And I think it was very illustrative to understand what each person needed.
And this is also the river of demand. Have you covered the river of demand yet?
Yes,
Okay.
That was their exercise to draw the
great.
river of demand.
Okay, so I'm going to start the video. Let me know if you can't hear it. Can you hear it?
Food manufacturer Nestle operates
Yes.
119
Okay, great.
facilities across 28 states in the US. To stay relevant as the market evolves, Nestle launches about 75 new products each year. The process begins with an initial push of inventory into the market. Then, a monthly review aligns stakeholders on key decisions, such as when to push more inventory. Yet new products combine relatively low volumes with high variability. This makes it rather challenging to balance supply and demand. Forecasting is difficult because demand signals are misleading clues or red herrings jumping out of the water too late. Proxy data is muddy, inconsistent, and dispersed across stakeholders. Data therefore needs to be processed manually, leading to a latency of 2 to 6 weeks before a decision can be made. In addition, orders from big customers like Walmart are filling the channel but don't necessarily indicate an increase in consumer demand. And some orders are driven by sales targets rather than consumer demand. Meanwhile, stakeholders are navigating in the dark, each approaching the river of demand from a different perspective. The product owner needs to understand if and when the product will meet financial targets. Finance needs a consolidated financial summary and the impact on the portfolio. Sales wants to know if trade and advertising spends are effective. Supply chain wants to know when to start the next production run. And procurement needs to ensure raw materials are available on time. Nestle is now testing a new concept to evaluate how an outside-in approach can produce better results. The outside-in concept means that all stakeholders involved in the product launch are sitting together in a blimp looking at the river of demand. Walmart point of sale data and other external data provide insight into product performance and the drivers of demand. That data is unified in near real time with data from suppliers, contract manufacturers, and packaging providers. Role-based dashboards give stakeholders a consolidated view on what they need to know. Are sales on track? Should a new production run be scheduled? Is it worth further investing in the new product? Is merchandising support effective? This increased visibility will increase forecast accuracy and is expected to accelerate and improve decision-making, allowing Nestle to better react to issues and seize opportunities. Product launches will be much more successful and profitable, produce less waste, and make consumers and customers happier.
Okay, Margot, let's go back to our slides here. So was it useful to build the river of demand for an artifact, or give me your reflection?
Absolutely. So when I took the training and you gave us the homework to draw a river of demand, I think I drew 2 lines on a paper and then I gave up because I could not figure out how to translate this messy environment into a river of demand. And so thankfully you pushed OMP to put some resources behind helping create it. And they came up with what you just saw. You also, Laura, interviewed me so I could talk about the right things, because even that was hard to really understand, of like, what are the things that are relevant and how should I think about them in order for them to show up in a useful way in the river of demand. So that, was the river of demand. And then I will show some examples of the visualizations role by role.
Now, just to give the group some perspective, you were a little bit afraid might be too harsh, but you were like, I'm not an artist, right? And so when I had them hire an artist, we actually did, I think, 3 half days of interviews to get it to the point with the artist. So your output is fantastic. When people see the river of demand, they're like intimidated, like, I can't do that, right? But it took us a while to build it, and we had help from artists, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, artists and script and everything. And I think one of the biggest struggles was taking all of the concepts and getting it down into like a 3-minute video as well. I mean, I think that the drawing itself is great, and we went back and forth with that a number of times, but getting the video down, and we had to pick and choose what was most important to include in it. But I love how it turned out, and I don't think I could have done that myself.
Yeah, but look what you did. So anyway, so now we have the role-based views.
Yes. Okay. So we'll start with sales. And so these views here are looking at the sales targets against actuals. And, this is made up data. So Sandy, Shannon, don't freak out. It's not real data. But I think it's good to think about how we put the views together. We spend a lot of time looking at those key, the stakeholder questions, right? What are the key questions that somebody in sales on a new product launch would want to be able to answer easily and quickly? Volume targets, revenue targets by SKU, by account, by region are all different kinds of slicing and dicing of the data. And in this case, you can see that the actuals are pretty well aligned, even mostly ahead of target. So for this kind of made up product, sales are doing okay. We also know that the sales rep would want to really look at, or the sales team would want to really look at account penetration. So how is this selling into customers and stores? Is it against plan, right? Is it ahead of plan, behind plan? In this case, a little bit behind plan, but pretty close. So knowing that they look at it in all these different kinds of views, like slicing and dicing it, and then layering in point of sale data on top. So by account, again, by week, by region, these different views would be the way that sales can quickly make all the decisions that they would want to be able to make on a new product launch. The general manager, who's the marketing person in our organization, would also be looking with sales about marketing activities. So is the marketing investment paying off compared to the spend, and is it actually selling through? So besides just orders, looking again at point of sale. So looking at the uplift from each of the different activities against the target, against the actuals, in this case, what we see is that the uplift is not as high as the sales and marketing people would want it to be based on the marketing spend. So one thing we can do in that situation is look at where is the inventory sitting in the supply chain. So we typically look at days on hand within our Nestle facilities, but we don't often layer that in with days on hand sitting in customer distribution centers. We now have, again, harmonized in our data lake, the data for our sizable, significant customers on where the inventory is sitting in their distribution centers as well, and sometimes even stores. So now we can see that added to all together, the days on hand is increasing. So what it says is we're selling to our customers, but the consumption from the consumer who walks into a store to buy a Nestle product isn't supporting that. So we have just an inventory buildup in the pipeline. So then if you go to the next slide, we start to look at what can we do about this.
So Margot, while the slides are moving, there's a question in the chat about what percentage of your channel do you have POS for?
So Sandy and Shannon, can you help me? I know we have it for, I think, our 6 or 7 biggest customers. I want to say it's probably in the 70% range.
I think for meals, we're actually only in the 60% range.
Okay.
I'm not the rest of Noosa.
Okay. So it varies by division, by product type, but I think it's, say somewhere in the 60s, 70%.
But isn't there an opportunity with machine learning to abstract the insights for other clients?
It could be, it could potentially be. So if you can you go back one slide again, please? Yeah, so you can see on the left side, it's really clear that the orders are significantly higher than the point of sale data. So I just wanted to call that out. Okay, next slide. So what can we do about it? So in this, we made up 2 scenarios of a buy one, get one free and a social media campaign. And then we can look at what the forecast would be based on those 2 investments, marketing, sales campaigns. And so this would be, okay, if somebody in sales is now saying, I see the point of sale data, the point of sale is going down, even though the inventory is going up, what else can I do? And that's where we came up with these 2 potential opportunities. And then we do some analysis and show the difference between them. So if you go to the next slide, you can see a comparison of these 2 different this is the details on the actuals versus the budget. So this is where we just get really deep into all the different components of the financials. And then the next slide, I think, is where we talk about the different, So here we compare the different scenarios, the social media campaign, the buy one, get one free, based on all of the different financial KPIs that we look at: cost, profit, revenue, sales volume. And then we're able to compare them, with cannibalization, without, across the different metrics. So you can see in this case, one of the sales campaigns is significantly higher in terms of profit, but the sales volume is actually lower. So this is a good way for finance to compare side by side the different scenarios that they could run through marketing and sales.
And conventional processes, again, give us output in 3 to 4 weeks, and most people only measure 50% of their trade. So
and also this is all built on the same data, right? So all of these different visualizations are leveraging the same data so that they're consistent. So what we don't want, and what we often see in companies of our complexity and size, is that sales comes to the table with one set of data, supply chain comes to the table with a different set of data. The idea here is that the role-based dashboards are all pulling on the same data. And so we get into the details of procurement as well. So we can look side by side of the different campaigns and what are the raw materials that would then be short in terms of supply based on the different campaigns, and can procurement overcome those? And if not, maybe one of the campaigns isn't feasible. So this is just a summary of the stakeholders and roles that we focused on.
So thank you so much, Margot. Margot started out being, she gave me a lot of pushback. She hadn't gone through the training when she came to Blaze. She didn't really know the terminology. She sat in the back of the room like, I'm not sure how this is all going to fit together. But she's been a great student. And when I forced the group to go back and do the role-based discovery for, design thinking, I got a lot of pushback for the group. It actually took us about 2 months to do the role-based definitions. Beth, you got your hand up. Beth, the floor is yours.
Yes. So excellent presentation. Thank you. That's
Thanks.
amazing. So you're with the analytics group, supply chain analytics. Was there sponsorship, or what was the sponsorship at an executive level? Because obviously this is a lot of work, and you have to have a lot of influence, right, to be successful here.
Yeah, so we have not rolled this out.
Okay.
And so I'm still sort of grappling with what's the time, place, who's the audience, how do we do that? And part of this has been an ongoing conversation with OMP of what they're going to do in their software. Because if this doesn't get in the software that we use, it's not going to really work the same way. So I did most of this on my own, to be honest. I'm sure, I asked somebody in the general manager of one of the divisions to help me with a lot of this stuff that I don't have the knowledge about on the commercial side. But this is very much just sort of a prototype. This isn't live. And so again, it's like, is this going to be in OMP? Because if it's not, it's good in theory, and there are other things we can try to do in bits and pieces, but it's not gonna, we can't just take this and use it. So that's kind of where we are in the process of trying to figure out where to go with this.
Okay.
So just
good.
to give you some perspective, Beth, Margot works for a person that has been a client, a contact, who's followed my work for 15 years. And as her boss kept getting promoted, he's always wanted to use point of sale data. And every now and then he'd check back in with me, and they went through many, many implementations of demand planning. And he's like, why can't we not get this right? So when we were doing this event to share the Zebra output, which was what 09 did the original testing of, I called him and said he should come, and he couldn't make it. So he sent poor Margot, who didn't have a clue
Okay.
what she was getting into, right? And she sat on the back row and kept saying, but how do I make this implementable, right? And so, she's coming off a long way, hadn't she? But,
Yeah.
they actually have one of the best centers of excellence that I've seen in the industry to be able to do this kind of work. And the interesting thing to me was that Margot didn't know she had so much data. So when I kept sending her back to find out if she had data, I don't know, Margot, your perspective now when you found out you had more data than you thought?
I mean, I think we have more data than we did a year and a half ago also. So I think it's both. But we have redone, I don't even know if I told you this, Laura, but we rewrote all of our statistical forecasts, which my team is responsible for, using Azure Machine Learning. And we're now testing it with a whole bunch of external data signals. So we're testing it to see if we can get, significant improvement from all the inventory data, the point of sale data. We're even looking at, economic data, WIC and SNAP, for those who know about the food programs and things like that. So we are bringing in even more data. So it's people, process, technology. It's all three, and they all three need to mature at relatively the same pace. Otherwise, it's really hard to make any of this stick.
Yeah, thank you. It's exciting. I mean, really, really super, super exciting what you've accomplished so far. So